Call this meeting to order. Welcome back to meeting number 80 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Natural Resources. Today we are meeting in public to discuss committee business. In accordance with our routine motion, I'm informing the committee that all remote participants have completed the required connection tests in advance of this meeting. When we suspended on Wednesday evening, Mr. Angus had the floor.
Point of order,
and
Chair.
We had resumed debate on the sub-amendment of Mr. Patzer. So, Mr. Angus, you do have the floor.
Point of order, Chair.
I look forward to being able to speak.
Point of order, Chair.
Angus, point of order. We have a point of order. If you could hold one sec. We have a point of order for Mr. Jennis.
Thank you, Chair. I know there was some dispute at the end of the last meeting regarding who has the floor, and if you will allow me a moment, I would like to lay out precisely the rules that operate, because I think they will inform the credibility and the legitimacy of this committee going forward. If a member is improperly deprived of the floor, they do have the right to raise these issues in the House. That has been established with the new standing orders. So I reviewed the transcript of the committee meeting, and I want to read an exchange that happened immediately prior to when I sought to raise an issue of privilege.
Mr. Jennis, can you hold, please?
Chair.
Those are confidential until published. I just want to remind you that those are confidential until they are
It's all
published.
on video.
Chair, maybe I can just maybe clarify.
As long as you're paraphrasing that it was a public meeting.
Challenge the chair so we can move on? This is part of the obstructionist tactics that he used abusively against you the last time against the rest of our
Chair, I just want to maybe clarify with respect to what I described as the transcript. So my staff watched the video and transcribed the text, which I'm about to read. So it is a transcript, and it was done by my staff copying from the video. Ms. Stubbs said, "Chair, just so we can all have confidence, can you just review the speaking list again?" The chair said, "I can't acknowledge unless there's a point of order." Ms. Stubbs said, "Oh, point of order. Could you just review the speaking list again for us, just so we can all be clear on what topic, on what, because it's evolved throughout the days." The chair replied, "We are on the sub-amendment to the amendment, Ms. Stubbs, and the speaking list is Chair. And Mr. Jennis is up next on the speaking list, Ms. Stubbs. And then who after that? Chair. Then Mr. Angus. No, Chair, I was. Chair. No, I have. Mr. Angus. You said Mr. Simard, and then Mr. Angus. Chair. We have Mr. Jennis, then Mr. Angus. My apologies, Mr. Jennis. Then Mr. Angus. You said Mr. Simard, then Mr. Angus. A member. Point of order. Point of order. Point of order. Ms. Stubbs.
Point of order.
I guess you can challenge the chair, Charlie.
Point of order.
The chair said, "Okay, I'm going to ask all members."
Mr. Jennis.
Point of order.
Happy to pause the reading for
Point of order.
Go ahead,
your direction,
Mr.
Chair.
Thank you. I think this is an attempt to filibuster and stop me from speaking. As has been proven, I had the floor. You ruled on that. If Mr. Jennis wants to challenge it, he must challenge the chair. I think we need to move on because this is a tactic he's been using to be very abusive at our committee since he arrived.
Wow.
Chair,
Thank you. Mr. Jennis, thank you for that, Mr. Angus. I will allow Mr. Jennis just to finish what you're going to say, and then I have something to add to that based on procedural responsibilities.
Thank you, Chair. I am almost done, but I wanted to read the transcript because it proves precisely the point. Chair said, "Okay, I'm going to ask all members." We have Mr. Jennis and then Mr. Angus. So you established that order, Chair, and then you proceeded to me, in which I said, "Thank you, Chair. I want to start by moving that the privilege of the member for Peace River Westlock had been breached when the chair and the committee refused to allow him to speak on C-69. Now, at that point, you'll recall that I sought to move a motion of privilege. You correctly pointed out subsequently that it is up to the chair when a matter of privilege is raised at committee to determine if that is a matter of privilege or not. Now, I think it was unfortunate that you initially allowed the debate but then ruled later that it was not a matter of privilege. Nonetheless, that was the ruling you made, and it was upheld by the committee, which meant that no motion was moved. No motion of privilege was moved because you determined it was not a matter of privilege. Since you determined it was not a matter of privilege, no motion was moved. I had the floor before I tried to move that motion and was told I couldn't, and I had the floor after I tried to move that motion and didn't. there are various means by which the chair can establish the order, but the chair in this case did establish the order. The chair determined that I had the floor, provided me with the floor, and cannot then decide in the middle of my remarks that I no longer have the floor. Once I have the floor, I have the floor, unless and until I cede the floor, or if there are some other reason why I can't, why I have given it up. But I think the transcript is clear that I had the floor. I was given the floor properly by the chair. No motion was moved, and thus I didn't lose the floor. At no point did I cede the floor. So I have the floor, Chair, and the legitimacy of the committee and all subsequent proceedings depend on your willingness to uphold the rules as they are clearly written and established in the book and in the transcript. I hope you will rule in accordance with the rules. Thank you, Chair. That's my point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Jennis, for your point of order. Mr. Jennis, a ruling was made and upheld by the committee as it was challenged, and it was upheld. If you would like to continue, you can add your name to the speaking order as we have conversations on the sub-amendment. But I would like to take this opportunity to also remind our committee members on some procedural responsibilities. Chairs preside over committee meetings and oversee committee work. They recognize the members, witnesses, and other people who wish to speak at these meetings. As in the House, all the remarks are addressed to the chair. So that should clarify by that passage that the ruling that has been made by the chair has the authority to do so. I would remind all members, if you would like to speak on a sub-amendment, because we're on a sub-amendment right now, or an amendment, or on the main motion, you have the right to do so. You can raise your hand. We will put you on a list, and we will recognize you when your turn comes. And so we will now proceed.
Chair, point of order.
Angus.
Just hold on.
Chair, point of order.
Chair.
I don't understand your ruling.
I called for a point of order.
Mr. Williamson, sorry, I did not recognize you on a point of order because I did not hear you call a point of order. Mr. Jennis, on the point of order, and then I'll go to the next point of order.
Yeah, Chair, I don't, respectfully, I don't understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
You had previously made a ruling with respect to, sorry, and I want to make this point clearly and precisely, and hopefully we'll be able to have a respectful understanding of the rules, Chair, because you had made a ruling with respect to the question of privilege, and you determined at that point that the matter was not in relation to privilege. That is the ruling I think you were speaking of. You made that ruling. That ruling was upheld. And that meant that my motion had not been moved. No motion had been moved. But that didn't change the fact that I had the floor, and I still have the floor.
Mr. Jennis,
so I don't think you have a basis for ruling.
I'm going to pause you, and we have a point of order from Mr. Angus on your point of order.
Thank you. I think what's very concerning is this level of intimidation of the chair to stop other MPs from speaking.
It's not a point of order.
So I would ask, Chair, that either Mr. Jennis challenges
this is
the
not
chair.
A point of order.
Either he challenges the chair or he sits quietly and shows some respect for other people to have an opportunity to speak, which has been denied to all of us because of their behavior. So if he's not willing to challenge the chair, I suggest that you assume control of this meeting and allow everyone their role to speak, as we are here to do.
Thank you, Mr. Angus. Before I proceed to Mr. Williamson on a point of order, Mr. Jennis, I would remind you, the chair does have the authority to determine the speaking order, as stated in the passage. We had previously, that decision was made, and the committee upheld that ruling. So we'll now proceed to Mr. Williamson.
Chair, point of order on that point of order.
If you so choose, you may challenge the chair.
Chair, on that point of order, I think you are misunderstanding, and the clerk can share with the committee or with you if it's helpful. The chair establishes the speaking order. The chair does not, once a member has the floor already, decide in the middle of that member's speech that the chair doesn't like what that member is saying, and therefore he has lost the floor.
So
that's not what establishing a speaking order means.
Mr. Jennis, we are not going to get into debate
No, but we're going to uphold the rules of this committee, Chair.
A rule was upheld.
Because you do not have the right to show
Sorry, Mr.
complete
Jennings,
disregard for the rules.
Point of order,
Chair.
Could we get the clerk in on this?
We have a point of
Hear
order
from the clerk?
Mr.
Point of order, Chair.
We have a point of order from Mr. Williamson. We will go to him next. Mr. Williamson, you are next on. You had a point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I wasn't here at the last meeting. You mentioned a ruling. I'm unclear if that ruling was made today, because Mr. Janusz did raise a point of order. I haven't heard a ruling from that. Now, you are absolutely right that the chair does get to set the speaking order, but where Mr. Janusz has a point is if he had the floor in the last meeting and that meeting was suspended, it does go back to him. And the chair is not in a position to remove that privilege from him. And so I would seek the guidance from the clerk as to who had the floor in the last meeting. If this had been a new meeting, you're absolutely right, you'd have the power to designate anyone to speak. But given that this meeting was suspended and Mr. Janusz had the floor, well, let's seek advice from the clerk.
You're making that up.
Let's seek
Okay,
advice
order.
from the clerk on that, Mr. Chair. That is my point of
Mr.
order.
Williamson, thank you for also.
Point of order?
I'm just.
Point of order.
Okay.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Order. Let's hear the chair, please.
Point of order.
I will respond to Mr. Williamson because he had a point of order and he had the floor. Mr. Williamson, that was decided on. The chair was challenged, and the committee did uphold that ruling. And so we proceeded on, and now Mr. Angus has the floor. As stated earlier, and as you stated as well, that the chair does have authority to proceed. And so that's what we're doing. We're on, just to remind folks, we have an amendment on the floor. We have a motion on the floor with an amendment and a sub-amendment. And I would ask all members the courtesy to allow members to participate on the sub-amendment, which Mr. Angus would like to do so, and he's been hasn't had an opportunity to say more than 3 words, I believe. So I'm hoping we can get to him on the sub-amendment and we can continue on with that so we can move to potentially a vote on that and other amendments as well.
Point of order, Chair.
Okay.
Point of order. Can I now begin to speak, or are they going to continue
So
to interrupt
we're going to
us?
go to Ms. Stubbs on a point of order, because I know, Ms. Stubbs, you've been waiting patiently. We're going to go to you. We're going to go to Mr. Bruson on a point of order, and then we'll go to Mr. Falk on a point of order. So we're going to start with you.
I had a point of order as well, Chair, if you can add me to
We'll
that
go to
list.
you,
Thank
Ms. Stubbs.
Thank you, Chair. Appreciate the time you're giving me. I need to echo, of course, the comments both by Mr. Janusz and by Mr. Williamson. I'm also confused here about why members are not aware of what happened and how things happened in the meeting, since all of it is in public and all of it is on video. This actually isn't a theoretical discussion between us all. It's actually not a matter of a point of perspective or our own opinion. It's verifiable in the video footage of this meeting that is public, so every Canadian can see what is going on here, as they have a right to do. This, of course, is technically the same meeting that started last Monday, when the NDP Liberals started at the top of the programming scheduling motion to dictate to the committee what we're going to do on these bills.
No, we're getting into debate now, Ms. Stubbs. I just
So
get back to the
Mr.
point of order.
Janusz did summarize.
Point of order.
Mr. Janusz did summarize
Point of order.
from the publicly available
She is
footage
making a
of
false
this
statement.
committee.
The NDP did not
exactly.
bring a motion. She's just making stuff up.
Mr. Angus, I'd ask you to hold, and Ms.
Mr.
Stubbs,
Angus,
I
I'm
would
sorry.
let you to
Yeah, I'll just respond to that.
just on the point of order, please.
I'll just also respond to Mr. Angus.
No,
I
respond.
apologize.
We're not going to get into debate.
I want to
No,
apologize to him.
you
I
can't.
apologize.
You make stuff
Would
up.
you
the
guys
point of order.
would you guys let me to get
No,
a
I
word
don't
out,
need
point
or
of
do
order,
the men
please.
both want to keep shouting at me?
Just on the point of order.
So I'll actually just refer to Charlie Angus, since he just made a point of order about what I just said. So I will say, I apologize, Mr. Angus. Thank you for that clarity, that you were not involved in the Liberals' programming scheduling motion to dictate everything to this committee. I just assumed
Point of
we were
order.
in the
Can we move
confidence
on?
agreement in 2025.
This is turning
Now
into high
I will
school. Can we
continue my
move on?
comments.
Mr.
So Mr. Janusz is correct about what occurred in this meeting, and Mr. Williamson is correct about his point. And all of this comes down to credibility that Canadians
Ms.
can
Stubbs,
have
Ms.
in our
Stubbs, I'm gonna ask
democratic
you to hold, 'cause we
institutions
have a point
and
of
in the
order.
ability of members of parliament to be able to represent the millions of Canadians who sent us here to do this job.
Thank you, Ms. Stubbs. We have a point of order. Do you have a point of order?
I do.
Because we have
Just
Mr. Bruson on a point of
Just
order.
on what Ms. Stubbs said, she keeps calling it a programming motion, and that's not what was put forward. I want to be really clear that this is not a programming motion. It was related to bring forward an idea for scheduling, and that's what the main motion is about. I think it's really important that we be factual. And the Conservatives have raised several times the reference to this being a programming motion, and it's not, and I just want that to be reflected in the record.
Thank you, Mr.
That's
Aldag,
not really
for
a
that.
point of order.
We'll go to Mr. Bruson on the point of order.
No, just point of order.
Mr. Bruson on the point of order.
Comment.
So it seems to me that what I'm hearing from the members opposite, and it's been a long tactic of just slowing this down, we're actually on a sub-amendment to a motion to schedule legislation from the House, which is standard procedure for people to do on a committee. But at this moment, the chair has ruled that Mr. Angus has the floor. That would allow us to go to the sub-amendment and finally get to the actual motion, unless the Conservatives continue to want to not have that happen. What I would say is, are the members opposite challenging the chair? In which case, let's vote on it. And if they are not challenging the chair, then let's go on to Mr. Angus, because that was the chair's ruling.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Bruson.
Point of order,
and I
Chair.
will remind members that a ruling on privilege was made and upheld by this committee. If members do want to challenge the chair on a speaking order, then you have the right to do so. And I would request, as Mr. Bruson has recognized, that a member challenge the chair on a speaking order, and we can go to a vote on committee. That's the committee's decision at that point. But I have recognized, post the ruling that was made and upheld, that Mr. Angus has the floor on the sub-amendment.
Point of order, Chair.
Okay, so Mr. Jennings, on a point of order, and I'd ask you if it's the same point of order again, that you challenge the chair on the speaking order.
Chair, I think respectfully you are confused about two different rulings. There is the question of whether the privilege motion that I raised pertained to privilege, and you ruled
Point of order.
in the end that it did not. That question
Point of order.
Okay,
is
Mr. Jennings, if
distinct.
you may hold, I'll ask you to hold
from-
because Mr.
Sure.
Angus has a point of order.
Point of order.
Thank you.
Don't you have a whole? Just
no,
point of
sorry,
order.
I have the point
Mr.
of
Falk's
order.
been waiting here patiently.
He
Should
has
you
a-
not be taking point of orders and running through them
I'm
one
trying
at a time?
to recognize, Mr. Williamson, I'm trying to recognize members and his point of orders on Mr. Jennings' point of order. So I'm not getting into
The
debate with
person
you.
that speaks the loudest shouldn't be able to overrule any
Well,
member that has the floor already.
Then I would ask.
And that's what he's doing. He's
No,
just sitting here barking
Mr.
into his mic, thinking he gets
Mr.
the
Williamson,
floor. Mr.
I will
Falk
ask
has
you
been
to
waiting.
cede the floor.
Désolé.
So,
Simplement pour
Just for the interpreters, please don't. Just for the interpreters, for their mental health, could you please speak one at a time? Because I think that they're going crazy in the booth. So if you could just speak one at a time and not speak over each other, I'm sure that the interpreters would much appreciate that.
Merci pour ça. So my point of order is that Mr. Jennings continues to try and obstruct. He needs to challenge the chair. Otherwise, we have to move on. If he's willing to challenge the chair, then he can get his way. But if he's not, he has to stop this pattern of trying to stop other MPs from participating in the committee. So I would ask you, Chair, to ask Mr. Jennings whether or not he actually is going to challenge a chair, or is this just a tactic to stop other MPs from speaking on some very important legislation?
okay, so on the point of order that Mr. Angus has raised, and Mr. Smart, thank you for reminding, first of all, our colleagues, everybody here, the importance of one member speaking at a time. It is important, as stated from last meeting, that when we are all speaking into the mics, it's really difficult on the interpreters. Number one, for their health and safety, but also for them to do their job, that they are doing an amazing job on providing interpretation services to committee here today and in the past and in the future. And we want to make sure that everybody is working in a safe work environment. So I will not entertain any more point of orders on this matter unless you would like to challenge the chair on the speaking order.
Sure, I was in the middle of a point of order when I was
Mr. Jennings,
interrupted on that
Mr.
point of order by
Jennings,
Mr. Angus. I was in the middle.
We have made a
point of order.
ruling last meeting. The committee has made a ruling
No,
which was
Chair.
upheld
Sure.
By the challenge of
Can
Mr.
I-
Janice,
can I be
I'm
allowed-
not going to debate with you.
Can I be allowed to finish the point of order that I was raising before I was
Mr.
interrupted
Janice,
by Mr.
I will
Angus?
ask you to cede the floor.
Chair, out of respect for the interpreters, you should let Mr. Janice finish his comments.
Ms. Stubbs, the chair has the floor, so allow me to finish, please. We had previously ruled on the ruling of privilege as a committee. Okay? The committee had ruled. If you would like to challenge the chair on the speaking order, you can do so. I will not, at this point, be taking any more point of orders on this. If you want to challenge the chair on the speaking order, I would ask you to do so, and we can proceed with a vote on challenging the chair. And then it's the committee's will to determine whether they want to uphold that ruling or not. So we will not, I will not have any more point of orders on the issue. I'm going to go to Mr. Angus so he can get to his debate on the sub-amendment.
Chair, on that matter, thank you.
Mr. Dennis, this is not for debate. You can challenge the chair.
Welcome.
You can challenge the chair, or Mr. Angus gets the floor. So if you'd like to challenge the chair, I'll give you that opportunity.
Thank you for the opportunity, Chair. I would like to move that the committee report to the House that the chair abused his powers when he breached the privileges of the member for
Mr.
Sherwood Park,
Janice,
Fort
you do not have the
Saskatchewan
floor,
by
and
taking the floor away from him
ask you
on the
to-
debate on the programming motion on Bill C-50
Chair, could you
and
cut the mic?
C-49.
Suspend. Thank you, committee members. I have heard arguments made on who has the floor, and my ruling is Mr. Angus has the floor. And so we will proceed with Mr. Angus. I will not allow any more point of orders on any rulings that have been made today.
Point of order, Chair.
And yes, Mr. Jennis, do you have a different point of order?
I have moved a question of privilege in relation to the violation of privilege by the chair.
Mr.
And I'd like to speak to that.
You don't have the floor to do
Mr.
that.
Jennis, you do not have the floor. Mr. Angus has been recognized as the individual.
How can I raise a question of privilege when the nature of the violation of the privilege is to not allow me to speak?
Mr. Jennis.
Like you're just making things up, Chair.
So
you're just making things up.
Mr. Jennis,
you would have order if you respected the rules.
Ruling, and I'll ask you to turn off your mic.
No, Chair, you're being a dictator.
I'm asking the presiding and verification officer to keep mics off until I've made a ruling and acknowledged a member to speak. All members do have the right, I will be very clear, to speak when it's your turn. I have made a ruling on the speaking order, and the speaking order is that Mr. Angus has the floor.
Point of order,
If committee
Chair.
members would like to challenge that ruling, that ruling can be challenged, and the committee can, at that point, proceed to a vote. So, Mr. Jennis, I will not be accepting any point of orders and rulings that have been made.
Move a motion of privilege.
Mr. Jennis, you do not have the floor. Mr. Angus has the floor.
Chair, the rules.
Chair.
Point of order, Chair.
Point of order.
The rules provide that I can raise a question of privilege.
Mr. Jennis, I would ask you. So, I will ask colleagues just to
Absolutely.
pause for a moment, please.
Absolutely.
Has been made by this committee.
Point of order, Chair. I do not need the floor to raise a question of privilege. I can raise
We
it.
have made a
Introduce a
ruling, and a
motion.
previous
You do.
ruling has been made.
I have a point of order.
Mr.
I'd like to raise a
Jennis.
question of privilege.
He said he was bringing forth a motion. He doesn't have the floor. Now he keeps.
It's a
changing-
question of privilege.
But as he's claiming to have a motion, when this is I have the floor. So, Chair, if you would allow me to continue, because I am here to do my job as a parliamentarian to speak on C-50 and C-49 and the need for us to respond
Point
to
of
the
order.
Parliament vote that was done by
Point of order, Chair.
all members of Parliament to have our committee undertake this work.
Mr.
So I
Angus.
look forward to taking that on, and Mr. Jennis, whenever he gets the floor, can
I have a
do
point of
whatever
order.
he does, but he doesn't have a point of order. He said he was introducing.
It's a motion of privilege,
So,
which you do
Mr.
on a point of
Angus-
order.
Has the floor.
Mr. Angus does have the floor, colleagues. I've recognized him. If colleagues would like to challenge the ruling of the chair.
Mr. Chair, you recognized me before as having a point of order, and you've never acknowledged
So,
my opportunity to raise my point of order, and that's because it seems as though when Mr. Angus decides to contribute to this discussion or conversation, he's immediately recognized and he's given the courtesy and the
So,
privilege to speak.
Mr.
But you have
Falk,
not.
we're getting in a debate. I would ask you I would ask you if it's on a ruling that's been made.
My point of
that
order was
there's
before the ruling was made, and so I want to speak to my point of order.
We can look at the video.
Okay, so you have a point of order on the speaking order?
Absolutely, I have a point of order.
Okay, so I've made a ruling, Mr. Falk, on the
Yes.
speaking order. So
I've
would you like
but I
to
had-
challenge the chair?
No, I had a point of order
Now
previous
ignored.
to you making this ruling. And so
Mr.
I think you need to recognize that point of order. That is the rules of the committee.
So Mr. Angus,
And
Mr. Falk, earlier I read a passage that was directly on the role of the chair. I have made a ruling on the speaking order. The speaking order is that Mr. Angus has the floor. That is, and so the ruling is that Mr. Angus has the floor. And I would like all colleagues to respect all committee members that allow them to be able to provide their interventions on the amendments that are on the floor. That is a ruling that I have made. If a member wants to challenge the chair on that ruling, Mr. Falk, if you do, because yours was on that, I would ask you to do so this committee can decide on how to move forward on that specific ruling that was made.
Mr. Chair, here's the deal. I raised a point of order prior to you making that ruling, and I wasn't given an opportunity to be heard before you made your decision. And I think what we...
We're getting into debate now. Mr.
Now I'm
Falk,
raising my point of order.
okay.
I'm actually raising
But if it's on that
Chair, for the interpreters, you wanted people to finish. Could you let
Ms.
Ted
Stubbs,
finish?
I would ask you not to turn on your mic while I'm addressing.
Turn off your mic and let
So, Mr. Falk,
You're just making things up.
Then
Chair.
stop speaking
I
so
would
Ted can
ask you
finish.
if it's on a previous point of order where the ruling's been made, that you can challenge the chair, Mr. Falk. If you would like to challenge the chair, please go ahead.
Because one day you're going to be here and we're going to be there, and the rules will protect you.
Chair, I do have the floor, correct?
Okay, so
You do, but I just want to verify that if Mr. Falk
Is challenging the chair.
is the
Okay,
challenging
fair
the
play,
chair.
fair play. I'll
Otherwise,
wait.
we'll be proceeding to Mr. Angus.
well, Mr. Chair, this is what I am doing, and I was going to raise a point of order. I want to give you, sir, as the chair, to follow the rules of committee, to follow the rules of Parliament, and to make the right decision. And I think Mr. Jennis before very clearly articulated the last part of our previous meeting. Excuse me, is it Charlie? Do you have the floor?
Actually, I do. Thank you very
No,
much.
no,
So can
no,
we
he
carry
doesn't
on and actually do some work?
Actually, the
'Cause I
point
do
of order
actually
has
have
the floor. You should
I do
know
have
better.
the floor, so thank you, Mr.
Order!
Falk. I'm more...
You guys should know this by now.
Order!
Actually does have the floor.
Order! Order!
Sure did.
Okay, I'm going to ask all members once again. I've given,
As an immoral person, John, you have no idea.
I would ask all members,
He's not bad.
colleagues, I would ask all members to respect all members through our discussions here at this committee. And
People are calling you.
Mr. Falk, a ruling has been made on who is on the speaking order next. So I'm going to give you the
Well, but I
opportunity,
was-
Mr. Falk, if you would like to challenge the
Mr.
chair on that ruling, then
Don't. We're the only ones quoting rules.
Chair,
order. Order. Suspend. Thank you, colleagues. We are back to our meeting. And where we left off was that the ruling was made on the speaking order, and Mr. Angus has the floor. So, Mr. Angus, you do have the floor. We did hear a number of point of orders pertaining to this specific issue on speaking order, and it was determined that Mr. Angus does have the floor.
Thank you,
order,
Chair.
Chair.
I
Sorry, Mr.
appreciate
Angus,
that.
we have a point of order by Mr. Falk. Mr. Falk?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, but you suspended right during my middle of my point of order. So I actually had the floor. We weren't up to Mr. Angus at all.
Sorry, I don't think that that's accurate.
So, Mr. Falk, what I did say several times on the previous point of orders, and also when you did have the floor, the ruling was made that the speaking order, Mr. Angus does have the floor to your point of order that you raised before we had suspended. So Mr. Angus does have the floor. But I will offer you, Mr. Falk, if you would like to challenge the chair on this, you have the right to do so, and then the committee can proceed to the vote.
Well, what I would like to do, Mr. Chair, is to point out a little bit how we left off at our last meeting and who
Chair?
actually had the floor, and give you an opportunity to follow the rules of committee. That's
So-
what I would like to do, Mr. Chair. I'd like to, without challenging your position or your authority as chair, I would like to reiterate what exactly happened here at our last meeting and have you make an informed decision, because I don't think you're making an informed decision because Mr. Janis did have the floor.
Chair,
And,
I think you ruled on
Thank you. We're getting into debate, Mr. Falk. A ruling as the chair.
Point of order, Chair.
I'm responding, Mr. Janis, I'm going to first respond to Mr. Falk. And I read this out earlier that procedurally, the responsibilities of the chair to recognize members as their turn comes in speaking order. This, as you referenced last meeting, this was also discussed last meeting, and it was brought forward that Mr. Angus has the floor. If you challenge the speaking order of Mr. Angus having the floor, I would ask you to please do so, and we can proceed with challenging my ruling as chair, because in my role as chair, that is one of the responsibilities, and I'm following that responsibility here to acknowledge members as they wish to speak. So, to that point, I will offer you, if you would like to challenge the chair.
I have a point of order on a
the
different matter,
speaking
Chair,
order,
before
Mr.
that.
Falk, I want to give you that opportunity to make sure as a committee member you have that opportunity, or I will proceed then to move forward.
Chair, I have a point of order
Excuse me,
on a
Mr.
different
Janis,
matter in relation
Mr.
to your...
Janis, Mr. Falk, I just want to make sure that we're clear. Do you challenge the chair? Or
Chair, I have a point of order.
one person at a time. Mr. Janis, Mr. Falk?
Thank you, Chair.
No, Mr. Janis is going to Mr. Falk. Mr. Falk has the floor. I'm asking if Mr. Falk would like to challenge the chair.
Mr. Chair,
on the
what I'd
ruling.
like to do is if you could clarify to the committee whether at the last meeting you indicated that Mr. Janis had the floor, and that's how you suspended the meeting. Could you clarify that for the
Chair?
committee?
So we clarified that as chair. I clarified that Mr. Angus has the floor.
Sir, that's what you're saying this morning.
No,
I
that
believe at
point
the
of
end
order,
of the
Chair.
last
So,
meeting, you had indicated,
Mr. Angus, Mr. Falk, now we're getting into debate. A ruling was made.
I have a point of order, Chair.
And a ruling was made. So I'm going to,
whether you could just clarify whether indeed you did at the last meeting indicate that you suspended the meeting with Mr.
So,
Janis having the floor.
Mr. Falk, a ruling has been made on the speaking order. I am now going to go to Mr. Angus on the point of order.
Order, Chair. I've been trying to get in on a point of order since long. Mr. Chair, I've been trying to raise a point of order since long before he does, and you've been
So,
completely
I will
ignoring
ask
my point of order.
Stopped.
I'm a duly subbed in and elected
I will
member
go
of
to you,
Parliament.
Mr. Janis, once I go to the point of order Mr. Angus has on Mr. Falk's point of order. Go ahead.
Stretch,
Thank
but I'll
you,
let
Chair.
it go.
I'm now into the second day of attempting to speak to legislation that was voted on by Parliament. I am very concerned, number one, about the health and safety of our interpreters because of the abusive behavior of the Conservatives, but also the abusive behavior of attempting to undermine the chair to limit the right of other members to speak. You ruled that I had the floor at the last meeting. I was shut down from speaking by these constant interruptions. I am now over an hour into this attempting to do my good faith diligence on C50, C49, and I'm asking you, since you have ruled, that we can shut down this obvious attempt at intimidation, and so that the rest of us, and I would like to hear from my other colleagues too, we have to move on. This legislation is important to all of us and to Canadians, and particular Canadian workers who are very frustrated by these tactics to stop us from making sure that workers have a seat at the table.
Mr. Angus, we are getting into debate. Procedurally, we have recognized that Mr. Angus has the floor on the sub-amendment, which is on Timmins. And so I know there's a number of folks who want to speak on this sub-amendment, and then we also have an amendment that was presented, and then the main motion. So I'm hoping we can get to that point to have that conversation. I hope actually today we can get to that point. But Mr.
Chair, you had said you would come to me on a point of order.
So, Mr. Angus, you do have the floor, but we do have other points of order. So I'm going to go to a point of order, and then we will proceed to moving forward with you having the floor.
Thank you, Chair.
And just for Mr. I have a point of order following Mr. Genuis. I just want to get on the list there as well. I'm trying to be respectful, Chair. I'm trying not to speak over anyone else, but I do want to be noted as having a point of order after Mr.
Thank
Genuis.
you. Thank you, Mr. Williamson. Okay, Mr. Genis, you have a point of order.
Thank you, Chair. There are actually three matters of order that I've been trying to raise. The first is that during points of order, members are entitled to make arguments about matters of order. Arguments about matters of order are not points of debate. It happened during Mr. Falk's intervention that you and others suggested that he was venturing into debate when he was in fact making substantive arguments in relation to the rules and matters of order. Engaging in debate is when you use points of order to make points about the topic that don't have anything to do with the rules, something like Mr. Angus just did when he was speaking about the legislation and his views on the legislation.
Sorry, point
that
of
is
order?
venturing into debate.
But
what Mr. Falk was doing was speaking about the rules and making arguments. And that's what I'm doing now as well.
Mr. Genis, if I could ask you to pause on Mr. Angus, on the point of order, if you could be very succinct on the point of order, please.
This is about our right as MPs to participate in debate. Mr. Genis has been ruled that he didn't have a leg to stand on. Either they challenge the chair or they stop obstruction, because this is what it is. It's obstructing my right as an MP to speak to important legislation. When I try and explain the importance of that legislation, they're getting up on more points of order.
Thank you. Thank you. We are getting into debate, Mr. Angus. Thank you for your point of order. Do you have a point of order, Ms. Stubbs, on
point of order,
Mr. Genis's?
Well, I guess you can tell me. Of course, the top of Monday's meeting, which is technically still this meeting, was about scheduling. And my immediate response, of course, was about an amendment to add to the schedule for this committee business in the exact order that you guys brought in and passed legislation, which was C49 first, C50 after. That's what started at Monday. What has elapsed since is hours and hours and hours and hours of NDP and Liberal MPs trying to kick off and shut down Conservative members of Parliament on this committee who have a right to be here.
Ms. Stubbs,
that's what we're talking about now.
We are getting into debate, but we do have a point of order from Mr. Bruson. Mr. Bruson on the point of order.
For nowadays, as Ms. Stubbs has correctly pointed out, we have been unable to go ahead with a basic motion that comes to all committees when there's government legislation that has been voted upon. And so you have made a ruling that Mr. Angus has
order,
the floor.
Mr. Chair.
We've been unable to get to that.
Pause. Ms. Stubbs, I want to hear the point of order from Mr. Bruson, as you did, and then on that point of order,
Correct.
we'll come back to you. Mr. Bruson, my apologies. Please go ahead.
I believe that you have made a ruling that Mr. Angus has the floor on the sub-amendment to a very standard scheduling motion, And I would ask that if the Conservatives continue to have a problem with that, that they challenge the chair on that ruling, or else we go ahead and do the business that workers across this country expect us to be doing for them.
Thank you, Ms. DeBrusen. Ms. Stubbs, on the point of order.
Yes, thank you, Chair. We all agree about the importance of debating this legislation, especially considering both of its significant impact. Of course, Julie would know that on Friday, October 27th at 2:58 p.m., she texted me, and she said, "I'm checking in about Monday and your thoughts on getting started on the bills at RNNR committee. Let me know if you want to talk." Now, of course, that was a follow-up. I'm going to finish, Chair.
I just want,
That was
just
a
to the point of
follow-up.
order, please.
It's about this
Yeah.
point of order. It's about the issue of scheduling. So as you know, and as you corrected me, and I apologize for that, as you correctly did, conversations did happen the week before that I wasn't supposed to refer to. I apologize for that, and I won't again now. But I got that text on Friday, and I responded with exactly the same argument that we've made here and that you all know we have also discussed. Now, she didn't respond to me. That's fine. She's extremely busy in her role, and that's fine with me.
I would just ask
then
you to
what
be
happened,
succinct
I will. But then
on
I'm
private
finished.
conversations that you're having, Ms. Stubbs.
So on behalf of the interpreters, if I could just finish, I'm going to wrap up right now.
I just want you to be on the point of order, not
I am
on
It's
a
about the
private conversation
scheduling.
that you've had with
It's
another
not about
member.
a private. It has nothing to do with a private conversation. It's about scheduling for this committee.
So if you could, on the point
I know
of
that it's
order-
really hard for everybody to be totally transparent and say the same thing privately and publicly, internally and externally. You will all know about me that that's a thing
Point
I
of
do.
order.
So this isn't a private conversation. This is the truth, and it was about scheduling at this committee. Now she has a big job and lots of responsibilities. Fine that she didn't respond, but that happened on Friday, and then you guys keep talking about wanting to collaborate. But the very top of the meeting on Monday,
Ms.
the
Stubbs,
Liberals
I just
walked
want to
in
know what your
with this scheduling motion,
what your procedural concern
with
is.
a motion to dictate the schedule to this committee. And Conservatives are saying we do want to collaborate. These
procedural
bills are
issue.
important.
Ms. Stubbs, is
The
there?
procedural issue is to be clear about actually what has occurred
Point of
in this
order.
committee meeting, which continues to remain to be the same meeting since last
okay,
Monday.
so
it was about the schedule. It
there's-
was about these
the
bills.
point of order is-
What's happened subsequently is the NDP Liberals have spent 2 days trying to shut down, censor, and kick out
Stubbs, we are-
Conservative members of Parliament who have a
are
right to
getting
be
into
here
the-
at this
we are
committee.
getting into
So
debate.
let's not bullshit anybody anymore.
Sorry,
If we
point
want to
of
get on
order.
the schedule of
Okay,
dealing with
sorry.
these bills at this committee, let's go
abusive
ahead and do
I will ask
that.
you to hold-
That's in fact what we were
Ms.
doing
Stubbs,
at the beginning of
I would
that
ask you to
Monday.
pause 'cause
But
we're
we're not
getting
going to
into
keep
debate.
participating in this charade while you guys pretend, while it's also out in public for all Canadians can see,
Ms. Stubbs.
that
Point of
something is
order.
happening here that isn't.
Mr. Angus, on the point of order.
Thank you.
I'm
Number
done.
one, we're now being subjected to, I think, some really unparliamentary and ugly language. This isn't a bar room. The
I
issue
apologize,
here,
Mr. Angus. Of course, you dropped the F-bomb.
Okay, Mr. Angus,
during
I
the
would
issue.
ask,
here-
Mr. Angus, could you hold
Mr.
for a
Angus,
sec?
you dropped the F-bomb.
Mr. Angus,
Talk about
Mr.
that
Angus.
next if we have to.
Oh, Mr. Angus,
Chair.
if you could just hold one sec, hold your thought. I'm just going to ask you to hold one sec. Colleagues, I made this ruling earlier. We had a conversation that we are not going to speak over each other because it is very difficult for the interpreters. We had a number of folks with the mics on at the same time, and it is really difficult for interpreters to interpret it, but also for the health and safety, as previously discussed earlier today and at last meeting. So I just want to make sure, if we have a point of order, we stick to the procedural relevance of the point of order, not to use it as debate, because that's what we're venturing into, but to focus on the point of order at hand and why you've raised it. Mr. Angus, on the point of order.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, as I was saying, this is about the ability of us to do work at committee. The issue of a text message between two MPs in a previous week is irrelevant. Accusing me of swearing when I didn't is irrelevant. What is relevant here is an ongoing attempt to stop me from actually talking about legislation that is very important to Canadian workers. So, Chair, I don't believe I heard anything relevant in that last intervention other than an attempt to walk the clock out. So I would like to ask you, Chair, to tell the members who've obstructed this committee that people do have the opportunity to take the floor when they get the floor, and they can filibuster then if they want, but they cannot be using these tactics to undermine and intimidate and actually swear at other MPs. We're here to do a job for Canadian workers, and they are watching, and people are frustrated.
Thank you, Mr. Angus. I would ask all colleagues to be to use parliamentary language in all meetings on how we conduct ourselves as parliamentarians, whether you're in the House of Commons or in this committee room. It's important that we use parliamentary language, respect each other as colleagues, have vigorous debates. That is important on issues of legislation that have a motion on the floor today. See the Canada Jobs Act, Bill C-50, and the Atlantic Accord C-49, which we have a motion on, an amendment on, and a sub-amendment on Timmins. And to that, that all members have a right to participate. We do have the floor to Mr. Angus, who has had the floor and has been unable to participate in the debate last meeting and today. So I will once again.
I was just in the middle of a point of order when
Thank you,
you.
Chair.
Mr. Angus, before I recognize you.
Sorry.
No, that's okay.
Yep. I'm just very
Before I
keen.
recognize you, I would just let members know that Mr. Angus does have the floor. All members have an opportunity to participate and debate on all the amendments on the floor today, the motion, the amendment, and the sub-amendment. We're on the sub-amendment. If you do want to participate, you can be recognized when your turn comes up. You will have an opportunity to be recognized at that point of time. You can then, at that point, have the ability to make your interventions on the sub-amendment. So, now, Mr. Angus, you do have the floor.
Point of
Thank
order,
you,
Chair.
Chair.
and
I
we
was in
had
the middle of a point of
so,
order.
So, yes,
Chair.
And I
Mr.
was
Angus,
interrupted by Mr. Angus' point.
we did have another member on a point of order before we got into the additional point of orders. I just want to go to Mr. Jennis first on his point of order, and then to make sure then we'll proceed back to you on the speaking order once we've gone through the point of orders.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So I was in the process of raising a number of issues of order, and then was subsequently there were interventions in the middle of that point of order with other points of order. So I will return to the points of order that I intended to raise. The first, briefly, was about the legitimacy of raising arguments, respecting matters of order on points of order. That is, in fact, what a point of order is.
Point d'ordre, Monsieur le
regarding
Président, s'il vous plaît.
matters of order.
S'il vous plaît.
Hold for a sec. Monsieur Samar, just one sec while I can get my...
Lentement, très lentement,
please go ahead.
ce qui est en train de se produire de...
What's been happening for 2 sessions is quite deplorable, and I don't want to be associated in any fashion whatsoever to that. Can we please respect some kind of rules of procedure that we can all respect? That's the first thing we have to do. Last week, there was a question brought to the floor. The Conservative members who are not members of this committee tried to get the floor. And we have a tradition to allow it. And since then, Mr. Genius is launching a point of order repeatedly, and you have ruled on that. That this was not a violation of our procedure. Now, before raising a point of order, we have to decide when that point has been dealt with. We all recognize that on a point of order, you have to be quite specific and direct as to what that point is. Now, the members' approach seems to be that if we keep repeating things by paraphrasing, that we're all taken for not being all that intelligent. Now, if he wants to keep repeatedly bringing up a point of order that his colleagues were victims of a breach of their privilege, we've dealt with that. Now, for the proper functioning of this committee, when one raises a point of order, it has to be identifiable as to what the matter of that is. We've dealt with that. You've dealt with that, and we should move on. And if Mr. Janus wants to continue, it's just an expression of bad faith in this case. So can we not agree that before raising a point of order, you have to identify what your point of order is without any preamble? Now, I don't see anything new that has been presented by Mr. Janus. We've completed it at that there's nothing left to say on the matter.
Mr. Smart, very well said. Thank you for your intervention. You. Well, no, I mean, our colleague, yes, but I think the point that our colleague raises on the point of orders being specific and cite clearly what your point of order is, rather than getting into debate. And my apologies, Mr. Smart. It took me some time to make sure I had the correct translation. And thank you to the interpreters for doing a really good job of providing clarity on what Mr. Smart provided. So, Mr. Janus, I would ask you, considering what Mr. Smart also just provided, that you be very specific on your point of order that you've raised and cite your concern of what your point of order is directly related to, so you can be very specific and direct, and so we can proceed moving forward.
Thank you, Chair. I'm extremely grateful to the interpreters as well for their hard work, and I raise points of order pertaining to the rules. I don't think any member here would dispute the fact that I know the rules extremely well. And Chair, I'm always happy to support your awareness of the rules in any way I can. I'm always available to provide you with guidance
I just
on
would
the
ask
rules.
you to be specific, Mr. Janus.
Chair. So I had a number of issues relating to order that I felt it was important to raise. The first was with respect to the legitimacy of raising substantive arguments in the context of points of order. That was the first point that I wanted to raise with respect to order. The second...
Mr. Janus, I'll ask you to hold that thought at substantive arguments. Okay? Specifically. Mr. Angus.
Thank you, Chair. And I have been on a lot of different committees over 20 years. A point of order is a point of order on an issue. Mr. Janus doesn't get to write out a whole long list of grievances and present them as a series extenuating issues in a point of order, because then what we're ending up again is interference, undermining the rights of other members to speak, the taking of the floor, which we're over an hour and a half into. So if he has a specific point of order, he needs to say it. You rule on it, then we can move on. He can't draw up a long list of grievances and slights he's felt over the last day and 2 days of our attempts to actually do work here. So I would ask you to make sure it's succinct, because I do have the floor. I am serious about getting this legislation passed. I am here to work hard, and I have been interfered with consistently since I was given the floor by the chair, and I think we need to move on.
Thank you, Mr.
And the accusing by Mr. Janus of saying that I somehow stole the floor is this is just beneath us as parliamentarians. This isn't high school. Mr. Chair, I think we've heard swearing. Now we're hearing these kind of base accusations. The Conservatives need to start treating this committee with the respect that it deserves.
Thank you, Mr. Angus, for your point of order and intervention on that. So, Mr. Janus, I would ask you to be on the point of order. You had at substantive arguments is where you had left off on the point of order, but I want you to be very clear on the point of order so we can rule on the point of order and proceed. So I'm going to turn it back to you. But if you could be very succinct and direct on the point of order you are raising.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've barely been able to get a word out, and Mr. Angus went on at length raising a point of order,
once again,
which
Mr.
essentially
Dennis, I want you to just
anticipated.
focus on the point of order, please.
Absolutely. My colleague raised a point of order which presumed to anticipate what I was about to do when I hadn't even done it yet. The first issue was about substantive arguments, and I think notwithstanding the interruptions, have been able to more or less get that point out. So I would welcome some clarity from the chair on that particular issue. The second is
Chair,
that Mr.
Sorry, Chair.
Oh.
Yes. You have a point of order, Mr.
Yeah,
Angus?
well, since he's asked you, He said this was his issue. Can you rule on that? Then we can move on. Again, it's inappropriate to claim a big long laundry list of slights. He raised his first issue. You need to respond to that. Then we can move on. So
I would say there's an opportunity to provide your arguments through debate, but not through a point of order. The point of order is on a procedural issue that has that you're raising at the moment, and so we would, if there's a ruling required by the chair or the committee, that be raised. And so we can move forward.
Sorry, Chair. The issue was I was asking you to rule on the issue he brought forward. That's why it's procedural, because he raised his complaint and then he says, but I've got other ones. He raised a point of order with a complaint about how the chair handled things. The chair should respond. Then we can just
Does he have some privilege that we don't, Chair? Because he's going on at great length on my anticipating my points of order that I haven't even raised yet.
Okay, so I'll ask once again. Thank you, Mr. Angus. I will just ask you to hold for a moment, Mr. Jennings. Thank you, Mr. Angus, for that. Mr. Jennings, we do not want to get into a prolonged conversation and debate, but we want it strictly to the procedural relevance. So if you can be, with your point of order, on the procedural relevance and not get into debate if there's a ruling required, or if you are not happy with the speaking order, I would ask you through that to challenge the chair. But if that's not what your point of order is, I would ask you to specifically keep it to the procedure.
Thank you, Chair.
And be very direct and succinct on the procedural issue. That's what I would ask of you. Oh. Okay.
I've received more directed guidance on how to raise my points of order.
Yes, we have a point of order. Mr. Jennings, I would ask you to hold. Sorry.
This is crazy. I've just
I would
been
ask
trying
you,
to
we have
raise
Mr.
a point of order.
Aldag on the point of order.
Just a quick procedural question. It looks like out of the corner of my eye I caught lights flashing, so I don't know if there's a vote. I think we have important work to do, so if that is the case, I'd ask for unanimous consent to continue with this important discussion. We have my office getting a lot of calls
Chair,
from Albertans asking for
unanimous
us to
consent will be available when you let members speak.
And so I think we need to get as much time on the record as.
So,
I'm just
colleagues,
asking procedurally. Is there a vote or not?
There
and
is.
Can we get consent
There is a. The bells are ringing. There is a vote. So I would ask colleagues if we have unanimous consent to continue
on that, Chair. If the chair is not enforcing the rules and depriving members arbitrarily of their ability to speak, then there's nothing to.
Do we have unanimous consent to continue? No, we don't.
No, because we're not letting members speak.